friends here. You can ask your own questions if you want, but I usually just, monitor the questions and feed them in. We're going to go, I think we'll go about 60 minutes, but we held 90 for this. So, anybody who wants to hang out afterwards and just do a little networking or visiting, those of us who can, will stay. And that's it. Zoe is going to tell us about the sponsors, because I like to let her do that part. There we go.
Yeah, thanks to our sponsors. Our annual sponsors are Prime Point, Tryon, Penn State Great Valley, PMA, Focal Point Coaching, and Tombow Visual Promotions. And also, Janine, I have a couple of upcoming events I wanted to let people know about. On May 17th at 2 o'clock, our sales and marketing subgroup, they're doing a presentation on driving leads into your funnel with lead magnets. That's presented by Paul Mosenson, who's one of the co-chairs of that subgroup. And then our job search and career development subgroup is doing top 10 LinkedIn strategies for 2021 on May 20th at 12 p.m. It's for job seekers, but there's also good takeaways for those who are just looking to increase their visibility and their presence and thought leadership on LinkedIn. And without further ado, I'll turn it back to Janine.
Okay. Well, I think without further ado, I'm turning it over to Jim. Thank you, Jim, for leading this discussion, for sharing what you've learned and leading us in a discussion of nonprofit board excellence.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk to people. And I know looking at all the people who were signed up before the session started, as well as seeing who's on the session, I think I knew a great many of you. So I don't want to try to project the information I'm sharing as expert knowledge, but I would like to share it as experience knowledge, and also, share with you some basic reference points, some sources of information that I think will be helpful for you in addition to our conversation. I purposely am not using a Excel deck, and what I propose to Zoe and Janine to do is within the next day or so, I'm going to consolidate all my notes into a Word document and then get it back to Zoe, and we can make that available for people if they're interested in following up. So I would encourage you certainly to make notes where you feel, compelled, interested, but I will try to get this out again in outline form. So it's not going to be a narrative form. It's going to be an outline form. There are really four basic areas I want to cover, which is basic board responsibilities. And again, this is based upon not only my experience, but some research to support it. Challenges faced by boards, and then really talk on a more practical level of how to increase effectiveness. And then lastly, where or when to intervene, or where or when to kind of get involved and try to strengthen, improve whatever the board process. So Zoe, if you would, just for a moment, put the screen up with the board, the resources that are available. And I'll just allude to that. And then again, that'll be made available. Boardsource.org, online, tremendous source of board information. Leadingwithintent.org, also a great source of board information. The one organization that's very strong and very big is the National Association of Corporate Directors. And that's because historically it's been more focused on for-profit organizations, but they've been getting more and more involved with nonprofit organizations. And in fact, I utilize them with the social service board I've been involved with for a long time to come in and actually do governance training with our board. So, and they were very good at that. So again, these are resources locally. There are several universities, colleges that have nonprofit centers. I'm not listing all of them specifically because I'm not touting any one or the other, but I will mention that LaSalle University has been established for a long time as having a nonprofit center study group. But I know Villanova has programs, Penn has something. And I think more and more institutions are getting involved with that. There are two I didn't list. And one, I saw Lou Graffman on the call. Lou, you'll remember PANO. PANO is the Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations. They actually help sponsor a nonprofit fundraising event for our organization about now, I guess, 4 years ago. They're not an organization that I have personally relied on for information or input, but they are there and they were helpful to us. So I thought it would be good to mention them. The last issue or the last resource I want to mention is GuideStars. GuideStars is an excellent compendium of compensation information for nonprofits. And typically nonprofits struggle with this whole area of compensation for their executive director. There was a major article published by the Philadelphia Inquirer, goes back now about 4 years, where they listed the 25 top executives in the nonprofit world in the Philadelphia area. And if you looked at it, you know, it was a whole range of compensation that just, you know, it kind of boggled your mind in terms of some organizations paying very high, some organizations paying low. So it really is a challenge for boards in dealing with that issue. We'll talk about a little more later, but let's get started with the basic agenda on. So if you go back to the agenda on board basic responsibilities, certainly the traditional responsibility that's always mentioned is the fiduciary role. And we all nod our heads and say, yeah, we have a fiduciary role as a board. So what does it mean? I mean, how does it really break down? And if you look at a definition of fiduciary, it has a lot to do with trust and oversight. And that's exactly the role. But then how do you operationalize that? How does it make sense? And over the years with nonprofits, I've seen some movement. Nonprofits years ago, the emphasis seemed to be on the boards just making sure or overseeing the finance of the organization and making sure that you know, the money was in the kettle in order to conduct the business. But clearly boards have grown in that area and they're expanding, and it is a growing need. And where it's growing is basically much more sensitivity now to HR issues, given a lot of occurrences in the last few years. A lot of sensitivity to general operational issues and having good, solid operational policies and procedures in place to protect the organization. So, you know, at our last nonprofit presentation on this topic, similar topic, was by Stan Silverman. And I've known Stan for many years. He highlighted several examples of the greater Philadelphia area over the past few years where there was pretty egregious mishaps, if you will, and has sensitized boards more and more. I think it has increased the a level of awareness that the board does have a strong role. He talked about the Philadelphia Housing Authority, the Art Museum, the School District of Philadelphia, all having different issues. The Housing Authority, there was tremendous sexual harassment problems. The Art Museum had financial problems. The School District of Philadelphia, it goes back a few years with the former Superintendent Ackerman. There were issues of how they dispense contracts with vendors. So, I mean, there's a whole array of things that have happened, and even on a smaller scale, that I think have pushed people to realize that, people on boards to realize that there really is a need to take a stronger role in the board responsibility. I like to break it down further though, because, you know, when it comes to, you know, what do you really do as a board then? And I think when I look at the fiduciary role, you're trying to ensure the overall health of the organization. And the way you do that is putting emphasis in key areas. And really the distinction from a board standpoint and a management operational standpoint is just that. I think the board plays a strategic role. The CEO or executive director plays an operational leadership and management role. Now, I don't know of any cases where this doesn't exist, but in all cases that I'm familiar with, the CEO or executive director is a member of the board in an ex officio role, meaning he or she doesn't vote, but still is part of the board. But when it comes down to carrying out the business of the organization, clearly, I think we all know this, clearly the responsibility lies with the CEO and executive director. A lot of what I really want to talk about comes down to, I believe, common sense. But I would say this, and I'm not being facetious. There's an old expression about common sense, and that is common sense ain't too common. What it is, though, I think it's not intuitive. A lot of things here are in front of mind. You don't think of it right away. But as you talk about it and discuss it as a board, it becomes really clear. It is common sense, but it takes that pulling out. So there are five areas that I've identified as key board responsibilities. One, strategic planning and ensuring that there is a strategic plan in place. Absolutely critical. I mean, that really is should be a classic responsibility of the board. Secondly, succession planning. If you're going to have a strategic plan, you got to have a succession plan to support it, realizing that there is always planned and unplanned turnover. Korn Ferry did a recent study, major study, on this whole issue of Korn Ferry being a huge worldwide executive recruiting firm. They made mention that what they're seeing more and more is there is stronger awareness on organizations' part, both for-profit and nonprofit, to move towards formalized, structured succession planning. I mean, if you go back, I spent 26 years in major corporations, an executive VP role for a long time. Succession planning in a for-profit world is like pulling teeth. Then they moved. There was when you got into the 90s, into the 2000s, when there was so much churn, so much change going on, corporations became much more sensitized to succession planning. But that next step was really to the area of succession planning, where the focus was on now and who do we have to replace people in our current organization and current positions. Korn Ferry is now suggesting that the most effective succession planning that they're seeing, not that they're prescribing or dictating, but what they're seeing with clients, et cetera, and their study, the succession planning is now taking on a new look, and that is to the future. Where, given the fact that we're all not going to be the same, the organization is not going to be the same, how do we look at the future in terms of succession? So it is a key role of the board. Not necessarily, again, when I mention these areas, it's not necessarily the responsibility of the board to do it. It's a responsibility of the board to make sure it's happening. And the board has a role of being involved in it. But a lot of this direction and input should be coming from the executive director. So the third area, though, that is a little bit different and is a primary responsibility of a board is the actual hiring and the evaluation and dealing with the compensation of the top person. In a nonprofit world, there seems to be a trend to call that person the executive director. We're used to the profit world where it's more CEO, but either term, you run into both. But the whole issue of hiring, the evaluation process, and then dealing with compensation is fundamentally a board process, without question. And that's where GuideStar, by the way, can be of help. The fourth area is that the board's responsibility is to maintain an ongoing audit process, and typically would look like an annual audit produced and conducted by an outside audit firm, certified by them, and then reviewed with the board or a team of the board. It doesn't necessarily have to be the board of the whole. It could be a finance committee, could be an audit committee. And then the fifth area is the area of the board ensuring that there are good policies and procedures in place. So we're going to do a couple polling questions. In the previous sessions, Zoe's really been good at developing these little surveys that gives us all help to see who's on the, not it's anonymous. Who do we have on a call and what kind of positions people have been involved in. So we're going to have the first question raised right now. If you just take a minute to do that.
Jim, while they're doing that, do you want these slides to stay up or should I take them down?
You can leave this one up. If that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want it to get in the way of the survey.
All right.
A lot of board members. Nobody is considering being on a nonprofit board. Well, sort of a self-selecting beacon members. If you want to be on a board, you've probably found one for yourself, I guess.
So I just want to review a couple major challenges that I think are somewhat universal. I mean, there's a lot of challenges that any board specifically can face at any given time. But I'm right here, I'm leaning on a major study that was done by Leading with Intent, one of the resources I listed. They conducted a major nonprofit organizational study probably about 3 years ago, but so it's aged a little bit, but the issues nonetheless seem still robust and still very much prevalent. They really list two overriding major issues. One is that board member diversity in many aspects needs attention, and diversity to include racial, ethnic, gender, but also diversity in skills and thinking and perspective. It's not common to it's uniquely to nonprofit boards. The issue and concern has been an issue relevant to all organizations for a long time. David Howell just mentioned in the chat, age also is an issue. I mean, the board, let's be frank, the boards are loaded with, that I've seen, pretty similar background people. And, the thinking does not get challenged because there's a lot of, I guess, cohesiveness and agreement on issues. And I think it's an issue, and certainly it's an issue that Leading with Intent has identified. Along with that, they've identified that there is a great need and demand, in line with what we've kind of mentioned already, for expanded oversight and clear vision and leadership from the board, and that role should not be left exclusively to the management, that the board has a role in that. And we'll talk about a little bit later what the various, I guess, approaches and roles that the operational people can play and the board can play. So I was going to stop there, and if there were any questions that you had that you could raise now or through the chat. Is Janine, anything?
Well, I just want to make sure, I'm not sure that we got to it, but David also at the beginning talked about, and when you were talking about resources, Blue Avocado, which is another good one, another good site to get on. First of all, what a great name for a site, and it's a good resource. I also go to I watch the Chronicle of Philanthropy just because it's not really so much about boards, but like trends and the things that can go wrong with boards will filter into articles there for the big stories. So, okay, wait a minute. I'm looking through these. Okay, so I don't have any other questions. So maybe we should just keep going and then the questions we'll do questions a little.
One
Wait.
just popped into the chat there, Janine.
Oh, AJ. Board responsibilities with fundraising, give, get policies.
Yeah, I'm going to come to
Can you
that.
share your thoughts? I'm sorry, the question, I did a shorthand of his question. Can you share your thoughts on board responsibilities with fundraising and give and get policies?
Well, the quick answer is, and we'll try to also address it a little bit later. The quick answer is the board has a responsibility for fundraising. And that's one of the areas when I really get to keys to increase effectiveness is a tremendous way of involvement and engagement of board members. Some board members, I don't want to go too deep right now, I'll come back, but some board members, new board members, existing board members get intimidated by that. But the intent is really to say to board members, hey, we have a responsibility to ensure that we're being funded in order to support the operations. The give or get gives an option, right? If you're willing and able to give funds, that's great. And if to whatever that limitation is, the ability and the commitment to get funds can certainly be a big part of the role. But I don't want to leave it. I'll come back, but I don't want to leave it at that. I want to say, don't forget, giving or getting also can be addressed through the involvement you have and the talent you have to offer. So that there's also a talent piece that doesn't have a dollar sign on it, and you're not getting paid for it either. That you can have a significant contribution in, and I think it's just it's a mindset that you want to try to participate effectively with fundraising. But anyway, let's move to the keys to increase effectiveness. And I would say in general, again, there are two major issues. One is to ensure quality board membership, big issue, and we'll come back a little bit to that. And then secondly, once we have a board in place and we have members in place, to maximize the engagement opportunities. And this goes back, including the fundraising part. So in terms of ensuring quality board membership, I'll say this, traditionally, a lot of boards just relied on the management to recruit board members and to go after and finding good board members largely with the ability to give. There was no question. I think historically that was a major issue. But now as we're moving into, I think, a great awareness of a greater responsibility than just the money, I think we need to focus on a couple things. One, to recruit board members who are absolutely committed to the mission and the purpose of the organization. I've heard too many times, and I don't always take it to be the exclusive reason, but I hear too many times people wanting to get on a board because, quite frankly, they want to be seen as volunteering. They like to see their name on the board list. I mean, that might sound a bit harsh. Honestly, from my experience, I don't think it is. I think there's some of that. I think there are a lot of really good volunteering board members who have committed their time and resources to an organization. So I don't want to paint a bad brush, but by all means, our recruitment efforts should be targeted to those who really understand the mission and purpose of the organization and support it. And in turn, by the way, that's going to affect everything that we do as board members. So it's not just a casual, okay, I understand what the mission is, I see what it is, I can espouse it. It's really buying into it. The second thing with board members, and I think this is becoming more and more a focus, an issue, is to bring board members on board who have specific skills that they can actually offer, and or intellectual capital, knowledge that they can bring to the board table. The interesting thing here, and I can attest to it for my own self, over the years, the strongest contribution early on I was able to make to nonprofit boards was my HR experience. There's no question that was helpful for me to be able to say to myself, hey, I'm helping here, I'm involved here, helpful to the organization in terms of gleaning knowledge that kept them more focused on the HR side as well as the finance side. I can also attest most recently, and it's been now over about a year, a little over almost 2 years, I got recruited to be on a for-profit board. And they were very clear. They wanted to bring somebody in on that board who had strong HR background. So they had a purpose. They had a drive to see that their skill representation on the board was expanded. And I think that's a critical piece to look at. So it goes beyond finance and HR. It could be general knowledge about the field that this organization plays in. It could be connections. It could be a lot of different things, but bringing specific information or skills with board members is critical. The third thing I really take a look at in terms of strengthening board effectiveness, and Board Source addresses this a little bit, and it's not universal, I will tell you that right away, but a lot of boards now are employing with new board members a letter of agreement, an actual letter that the board member will sign, which basically says, hey, I understand what the role is. It's been explained to me, and it's outlined in a small paragraph within the letter. It basically outlines how many board meetings there are, what the expectations are on attendance. Attendance over the years of many boards is an issue. The general guideline here is that board members should be expected to attend 75% of the meetings on an annual basis. There's always allowance for whatever reason, board members have to miss a meeting. Of course, now with past year particularly, so much being done remotely, it's made it a lot easier for attendance. So it's an interesting thing going on. In terms, again, going back to what AJ's question was, fundraising would be something that I think goes beyond any given person, but as an expectation of all board members to get involved in. The interesting finding that Leading with Intent came up with boards was the two particular board characteristics that matter the most are the understanding and acceptance, very critical, of the role and responsibilities. Clear understanding, clear acceptance of the role and the responsibilities. And secondly, the ability to work together as a team. The team piece, we all love to talk about. It's kind of we all talk about it as a nicety type thing for working together in an organization. For a board to be effective, there has to be a team atmosphere, climate, process set up where that actually happens, where decisions and programs are decided upon in a team atmosphere. So those two things stand tall. So how do we maximize, again, engagement opportunities? One, through a board's standing committees. Every board typically has defined committees that they have. And some of this obviously is governed by size of the organization. The smaller the organization, probably the less formal board business is conducted, the larger it necessitates more formality and more definition. But the standing committees on any board typically are the executive committee, which comprises the officers. Typically, that executive committee is given by bylaws the ability to act on behalf of the board in given short-term crisis, short-term decision-making, with the understanding, the usual delegation of this authority from the board is with the understanding that that executive committee comes back to the board as a whole as reasonably quickly as possible to share what that decision was, and in fact have the board formally approve it. But the executive committee is given that ability to do that. The second committee, I don't know how widespread this is. Executive committees are very widespread. Having an established governance committee, a small group of the board members who spend a lot of their time and focus on keeping up to date on current governance issues, and particularly ensuring that the bylaws are updated, and also that there are board operating guidelines. A lot of boards use now this mechanism to establish procedures and processes for how the board will perform, what's expected of them. And having the board operating guidelines can be adjusted, at any time almost, and with board approval. Whereas bylaws take a little more effort and usually demand and should demand counsel and legal review. So the bylaws should be kept real focused and tight. The board operating guidelines can address things like what's the recommended board size? How many meetings will we have in the coming year? When is it critical that we do the CEO evaluation? Should it be done in line with the fiscal year? Because many nonprofits are lined up on a July to June fiscal year calendar, or should it be done on a calendar year? Things like that would be outlined in the operating guidelines. Also, what are the responsibilities of each of the officers? And it's good to have that mechanism in place. And basically, that would be a responsibility of the governance committee, in addition to taking the lead responsibility on recruiting new board members with the executive director's involvement. And then coming back to the board, any new board member has to be approved by the full board. But that, in a short form, they're the major responsibilities of the governance committee. Then there should be an audit finance committee. And I think that's pretty obvious. And then also a human capital management committee. So those are the standing committees. Then there can be any number of advisory committees. And again, get back to AJ, this would be one of them. You could have a advisory committee on fundraising. And in that advisory committee, you don't have to limit it to board members. You could have board members and previous board members. Also, another way to look at it, if you have people who may be interested in getting on the board, an advisory committee could be an entry point. It could be a point for them to get involved and just get a flavor and taste of the organization before they make that, shall I say, fatal jump. The advisory committee is a great way of people serving. Again, both board members and non-board members. We had the most recent organization that I've been involved in. We have an advisory committee with I think 3 board members. And we also have former board members who have decided to resign after many years of service, who are still part of that process. So the other big area for an advisory committee is strategic planning. And the good thing about having this part of an advisory committee would be to don't lose the institutional knowledge. Again, with board members who may be leaving or people outside the organization who have knowledge about the particular field the organization is serving, may be able to bring valuable information to the table. And strategic planning is such a major area. So you have your standing committees, you have advisory committees, and then you also have ad hoc committees. And an ad hoc committee can be anything, but it can be as simple as we have a major event coming up and we really need some, board representation on it, as well as non-board. And usually this will also involve staff, paid staff, as well as other people. So there's 3 committee mechanisms for looking at engaging board members. And I think that the point I want to make here is that it's really through engagement that people are on boards are going to see that they can contribute, see and feel a sense of reward and recognition, and therefore have a greater commitment in the end towards providing that very difficult role. And I won't say it's difficult, of board oversight and that playing that fiduciary role. So the one comment I would make about committees is this, that if you're involved with a board or looking at a board, we've got to be careful when we structure boards that on a given committee, we're not creating a quorum. And what I mean by quorum is a majority of the board. The danger there is that the committee comes to consensus on something, makes a decision, comes back to the board, and it's viewed by the board as a whole, or in real terms, practical terms, becomes the decision of the board.
What?
Hello?
No, I think I think somebody wasn't muted.
Okay.
I'm not sure what that was.
I didn't know if somebody was screaming at what I said or. There are board structural issues that I think we need to make sure we pay attention to. And this all gets back to how do we really foster engagement? Board size is one of the issues. A good guideline here is a good board size is anywhere between 9 and 15. Smaller than that, you're limiting input. It might be practical that you can only start a board with 6 board members, but 9 should be a minimum. 15, typically when you reach that level, you're maximizing. If you're doing your job and bringing diversity into the board, you should have enough diversity there to have good board input and good board decision making. Once you get up to, and I've seen this with boards, 20 to 25 members, maybe somebody has a secret I don't know about, but I think it's extremely difficult to build consensus and build team with 25 people. So there's 2 solutions to that as you want to get more people involved, particularly with bigger organizations. One is to have an advisory committee where former board members and or new board members who aren't fully committed yet can participate. And the other is, and board source refers to this, is having a board within a board. So the bylaws can set it up that even though you might have a board of 20 people or 25 people, there is this defined number of people and define the functions. Typically would be involving the executive committee and the governance committee, but then could be expanded if there are financial issues, really prime or HR issues, whatever it is. But that defined number and makeup could be given the authority to make decisions on an ongoing basis. I hesitate to recommend that, but it is an option. It is something that Board Source recognizes on a practical level. I mean, you look at some of the educational institutions and it is different. They're not the same as, again, we're talking here largely about nonprofit organizations in the services field. We're talking about 501 C3s. And if you look at the IRS code for nonprofits, I mean, I looked at it last week just to double check. There's about 25 different categories. So all of this doesn't apply equally across the sphere of nonprofits. In principle, a lot of this does, but in actual practice, it could be different. educational institutions rely on boards of trustees. And it's a little bit different concept. And I don't want to get into that area, but what we're focusing on here are 501c3s. These are the organizations I think most of us as Beacon members would be looking at in terms of our own involvement and or maybe considering board positions. So not 9 to 15 members is a recommended number. And again, going back, I'll reiterate what I said before, 75% attendance is what generally is expected. So I'm going to stop there. We had our second question here, I think.
Yeah, we have two. We have two actually. So Lou asked about, and I think this is regarding, or maybe it was more of a comment, Lou, regarding, he talked diversity or better lack of diversity on nonprofit boards.
Right. I mean, I'll comment quickly because we've talked about this
Yeah.
and trying to think about programming for this committee. And it's certainly been a focus of Beacon this past year. And not all nonprofits lend themselves to that, but certainly trying to have a much more diverse community on your board is a very prevalent issue today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
Lou,
that's not to take away from any of the comments you made, Jim, about how you recruit for boards.
No, Lou, let me point something out though. Again, some of these comments that I'm making and recommendations, I would suggest from my experience, but again, I'm supported by some of the organizations like Leading with Intent and also Board Source. It's going to vary by size and scale of the organization. I will tell you that major social service organization that I've been a member of, we're actually required to ensure our continued public funding to have a minimum percentage of diversity representation. So that drives us to go out and do the very best we can to bring people in with diversity of race, ethnicity. I mean, in many of the nonprofits are serving very diverse populations. So we want to, work at that. Again, I think the way I would phrase this, Lou, is it's directional. We should be working as hard as we can by that, but we shouldn't put it aside and forget about it. Even though, it's on our mind, we got to continue to work at it. I guess that's the best way I can say it. And leave it at that. But I think we had.
Yeah, well, and then Don Campbell also, what are the risks of board members when things go wrong and there are financial or other issues? What are the risks to board members when things go wrong and there are financial or other issues?
Well, I think
That's a big question. What are you getting yourself into?
I'm not aware of any boards, and if there are, it should be addressed. I'm not aware of any boards who don't carry any kind of liability insurance, that board members would be protected as long as board members acted in good faith. Now, if there's fraud and something else, that's a whole other issue. And I leave that to the attorneys to maybe give a better definition on. But I think it's that simple. The other thing, though, to face, Don, is beyond that hard-nosed liability issues, is the reputation and the credibility of the organization, and with it, the reputation and credibility of the board members. To be honest with you, I don't want to continue to serve on a board where I'm aware that there are problems and we're not addressing those issues. If there are problems and we as a board are stepping up and working at them, that's a whole different approach. But anyway, does that answer the question?
Yes, but you actually sort of led to a second question, because what if there are problems? You're a board member who's trying to address them, but you're having difficulty in having a challenge because of the size of the board or the makeup of the board or whatever.
I think it is, bottom line, Don, I think the board member has a responsibility to call it to the attention to the board. And if it's a difficulty in that communication, I think you got to formalize it, document it. And by the way, most boards now have in their bylaws, as well as in the insurance liability, the liability insurance, you have whistleblower protection. So if you blow the whistle and it's legitimate, you will be protected. Now it's not it's not a great position to be in, but it's a position that I think once you're on a board, you have an option, and to either live up to it and address it, or say, hey, I can resign knowing that these issues are not being addressed. So there was another survey question though, Zoe. Did you want to post that?
Yeah, let's do the survey before we go to. All right, let's see.
Is the question relating to the leadership of the board or leadership of the organization?
The way we worded it was the organization, right, Jim?
No. The question really gets at the leadership of the board. Okay.
Thank you.
I mean, it has implications for the organization too, but directly the question is asking about the board leadership.
Okay, then
There are many boards where the board, the executive director actually runs board meetings and conducts the business of the board, but doesn't have a voting role. Okay, so. Okay. So this gets at the next issue I wanted to cover. And that's basically there are three styles or approaches to board leadership.
Here's something I found on the web. According to Antiochian.org, included in the gathering of Catholic, evangelical, Pentecostal, and Protestant preachers.
I got interference coming in here. There are three approaches or styles to board leadership. One is the CEO or executive director leads, pretty much defines the agenda, may or may not get the board president to take a look at it beforehand, but pretty much guides that effort. The second is where the board itself, through its leadership, takes the lead on defining what board agendas are, what the board issues are, what we need to address, etc. And then the third area is the area of the executive director and board leadership collaborating. Now, when we set up this question, it obviously is somewhat begging the issue. The most comprehensive and best approach is that the executive director and board leadership works together to collaborate on the business of the board as well as what's going on in the organization. The difference is the board does not manage the operations. The executive director does. The board oversees the operations with the executive director, but again, does not step in to try to run the organization. The CEO-led board, the board-led board, all are pretty efficient. It allows for things to get done pretty quickly. The collaborative approach, and I hate to use that word, I wish there were another word because it's kind of time-worn, but if that approach of working together is much more effective in the end, and I think over time, long time, is more efficient. But in the short term, you can get things done quicker by the CEO taking the lead or the board taking the lead. And I think that's where many boards fall into. So if you have if you have a very strong board leadership team, that can work, but, and may be efficient. But again, the effectiveness is going to be strengthened by working it together. Understanding that the operations is the territory and responsibility of the executive director. And the way the board can provide oversight to that and evaluate that is by mutually together setting up annual goals and having those goals agreed upon by the executive director, agreed upon by the board, can include the board suggesting some things that the executive director may not thought of, and vice versa, but there's agreement on it. And then the board takes the responsibility of providing the oversight and the evaluation of the executive director. So there's always in the nonprofit board world, I see a whole array of styles on this. And, again, it's going to vary as the boards get bigger and requires more formality and more definition. But in the end, the board is the board, and the operation is the CEO, executive director's responsibility. The worst thing to do would be the board steps in trying to dictate what should be done on a day-to-day basis. The worst thing that creates is that the CEO, executive director, doesn't feel responsible, doesn't feel accountable, feels like it's the board's decision. If things go wrong, it's the board's problem. We don't want that kind of climate at all set up. So anyway, I think this is something seriously to think about and to talk about as a board. But it looks like from the survey, there is a pretty good number of people saying there is collaboration going on. But you may have had some experiences where the CEO directed more, and then on the other hand, the board directed more. Let me make some summary comments about this whole area of engagement and getting board members involved. I look at it this way: compliance, providing that fiduciary oversight in and of itself does not guarantee, effectiveness or success. On the other hand, engagement in and of itself does not guarantee effectiveness or success. I think going back to that leading with intent, identification of two issues, major issues, what matters, the mix of understanding the role of compliance, applying it, but also engaging board members as much as possible, provides the pathway, if you will, I'll phrase it that way, to greater success and effectiveness. I mean, at the end of the day, we can put all the best processes in place, and it's not going to guarantee the results unless people's mindsets are there. And that's what we got to work on as a board. And I'll just say that the keys are essential to have alignment on mission and purpose, to clarify roles, to share the workload and maximize board engagement, keep everyone informed. This is an important one. No surprises. No information held for 2 months till the next board meeting. And then the last one is evaluate. And I can't stress that too much. The board's role is to evaluate the paid executive director, CEO. I keep on using them interchangeably, to evaluate that individual's performance. But it's also very smart on the board's part to periodically do a self-evaluation with some just basic questions. How do we see things working, and where do we see things needing to be strengthened? So the last piece I just want to cover very, very quickly is take the perspective, and that the reason I looked at that survey, who's at the first question, who's involved with the board right now, who's not. If you're at the individual point of time of considering a board or as a board member, on your part, it would really behoove you to have a very, very good look at the board and interview with the key board people, president, vice president, executive director, to get a real sense of what's going on. So I would encourage anyone who's considering a board to spend that time. It'll be time well spent. You don't want to say, hey, I'm ready to go, get on the board and find out there's some things that just aren't working. It can put that individual in a very difficult position, put it that way. The other piece is, as board as a whole, as a board is operating and moving forward, the last thing I want to make mention of is what I just quickly mentioned before. It would really behoove the board to do a self-assessment occasionally. Just a simple anonymous questionnaire, a simple discussion maybe, depending on the formality or informality of the board, to find out, hey, where can we strengthen our process? Where can we get better? And to move forward with that and make the changes that are necessary. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. I think we hit a time which I didn't expect to go, but 9:30.
There's one question I want to make sure we get in. AJ asked a really good question about founder syndrome, which is very common. In my experience in nonprofits. Can you share your insights on founder syndrome, where the executive director, who is also founder, is not able to share responsibilities? How can a board deal with that effectively? So somebody started an organization and they're just running everything. They've got a board, but the board really doesn't have a lot of power. What do you do?
That's a tough question.
It's common though. I mean, I can think of several examples off the top of my head of nonprofits with that situation.
I think the only possible resolution, and I'm just thinking, I haven't had that. I had that experience, by the way, in the for-profit world, in years ago, and on the heels of Sarbanes-Oxley, which created a great deal of sensitivity on the part of the corporate boards about what was going on. But the founder of the organization found a company, borrowed money, ran it as a privately held business, and then went public. And he forgot that he went public. And he was still trying to run the business as if he owned it. And it was a struggle. I mean, it was a real struggle. And we had turnover. We had turnover in the board. We had turnover in the executive ranks. So I don't have an easy answer for that. And I hate to say, but I want to be honest. I don't have an answer. I have seen on nonprofit boards where there's an executive director who has spent a lot of time there, who retires, and they've invited him back to the board, and he tries to play a heavy hand, not intentionally, all good intention, but nonetheless tries to really run the board and run the organization. The only resolution I can see is that the board gets together separately and decides on how the executive committee can get together with him or her and just lay it on the table. If there is a board, and if the board is fully filed in bylaws, the board, it's very tacky, but at the end of the day, the board could remove the person as a board member.
Yeah, well, and Paul,
that's not a popular thing.
Right, Paul has said that. I mean, I think I will say though, as perspective, that what often happens in that situation is that if somebody founds a nonprofit, they stack the board. And so the board is already, they're picking who's on the board, and the board is already kind of packed with people who are going to agree with that executive director. So if you happen to be in the position of being invited onto that board, I think the most important, thing is to recognize the situation, recognize what you might be getting into, and whether, it's a good situation for you or not. Whether sometimes that organization is running well, And so it's a pretty safe bet. I will share, I have never revealed to this group that my actual first board service was a situation like this. It was a founder. And I was pretty young and didn't really recognize what was going on. And it, it did not turn out to be a great board service experience, because that founder was actually lost some funders and then resigned and tried to tell everybody that it was going to be great. And I was, like 3 months on this board thinking, this doesn't look good. They've just lost 2/3 of their funding for the year. And this woman who founded the organization is resigning. So, I would say, look closely before you leap. And then Paula makes, in regards to this, makes a really good point about the funder, the founder issue, and how the board determines when it's time for the executive director, that founding executive director, to retire. And that is really, and Paula, I have to say, the examples that I know of this, the one that I just talked about, and I can think of another one where the founder, the things that I've observed is that something makes them retire very quickly, and they kind of leave the organization in the lurch because there wasn't really a succession plan, because they couldn't ever conceive that somebody other than themselves would run the organization. And so I think, the fiduciary responsibilities are all well and good, but the board has to get to the point, well, now I'm answering the question for Jim, but the board has to get to the point that it's not that, there are some outsiders who have joined the board.
Well, I would think that in that situation, search committee, not committee, search, outside search organizations get pulled in like on an ad hoc basis. Is that right?
An outside search firm to replace the funder?
Yeah, to find a new executive.
Yeah.
Replace the founder, right?
Yes, no, that is true, but I think, having, when it's clear that it's time for new leadership, having the board make that move is really tough. And when it's a founding executive director, what do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I think the issue will come down to the board collectively has to come to that decision.
Yeah.
The challenge is getting the board to live up to that. And to be honest, there are a lot of people who are on nonprofit boards are very, very committed people to the mission, the purpose, genuinely good people. But when it comes to management, not necessarily willing to take that kind of step, even though, Paula, it's an obvious need. I will tell you though, and because several of my board experiences have been more in large scale, publicly funded organizations, you are in fact, if you're violating certain principles, putting your funding at high risk. And when you're getting funded well through the public sector, it's not an easy mission to go out and replace that funding. So, there are periodic reviews, periodic audits by the governmental agencies to look at board practice and look at audit. But again, it's a balancing thing. It's the same, Paul, it's the same issue. And principle, kind of same issue with how do you really get to what Lou was talking to? How do you really deal with this diversity issue? We have a requirement that we have X amount of a percentage of board members. But, quota is really not where we want to be, but it's a reality, so you got to live with it and work at it. But more importantly, you got to demonstrate that you're working at it and taking the good faith steps. So, but the founder issue is a tough one. It's a very tough one.
Yeah, it is. I think what's good about this conversation, to kind of sum up, is that, we join, why do we, I think our very first session with David, who just had to leave, you join a nonprofit board, you're doing the work, you're giving some volunteer time for a cause that presumably you care about. And I think for most people, that is part of the motivation for getting on a board. But there's all of this really tough work that's involved. And I think a lot of people who join boards don't really look at it, don't look at those aspects of it as they're joining a board, and then sometimes get surprised at, you know, the actual tough managing of a nonprofit that they've signed up for. And so the kinds of things that Jim is talking about are really critical to know about as you're joining. I'm looking at Ann because you're right in the middle of my screen, because I know you're on a big nonprofit in Southeast Philadelphia, and they're very, you know, there's a lot there to watch out for, and that, you know, you've got to be prepared. I guess that's what I'm saying.
By the way, there was another question that we didn't post, but I just asked in general.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many current board members or previous board members have had good experiences with their executive director in terms of performance evaluation? I don't know how many boards I've come across that don't do it.
No, it's very awkward.
Don't do it. It's
Yeah.
very tough.
Yeah.
Now, I have a hot spot for that because of my background in the corporate world, but it was the same in the corporate world. We weren't gems at getting performance evaluations done regularly, but the longer you let someone perform without evaluation, the tougher it gets later on to try to step in. So that norm ought to be set up from the beginning. And
Jim, can I add something on that? For most nonprofits, the executive director position is the only one they hire. Everything else is left to the professional to hire.
that's right.
So it's the one place where that board really does have to be involved. Even, you know, I hate to use the word management, but they have to evaluate that executive director and how he or she is doing the job.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I was
yeah.
trying to say earlier.
yeah, and I'm not an HR guy,
Yeah.
but
No,
and
you're a
I have
you're a
certainly
legal guy.
struggled with it in my board roles.
Yeah.
But by the way, I want to add one other thing. We didn't talk about 990s here.
Yeah, I
No,
know.
we
I was
did.
going to ask. I saw your note on that. You know
Yeah.
what? I didn't know that, Lou. Tell us how they.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the 990, it's the equivalent for public companies telling their whole, it's the tax return
Yep.
for the nonprofit, but it has to be filed. It's public.
Yep.
Public document.
Yep.
So these examples of bad behavior that were raised in the question earlier, but not just bad behavior, everything about the nonprofit. If you look at the 990 form, including who are all the directors and whether they get paid or not. But the bad behavior is supposed to be disclosed. Yet good professional accountants and lawyers often serve the role to try and diminish that disclosure. And because it doesn't have to be filed really till sometimes it could be 18 to 24 months after the bad behavior occurred and was discovered, whatever it might be, it can be so late that you've really helped to quiet the issue whether you should or not.
Where do you see that? Where on the 990? Is it down in that notes section? I mean, where do you look to see if they've had to disclose something?
If they catch an employee stealing money,
Yeah.
that kind of issue needs to be disclosed. Where, I don't remember the specific spot.
Where you see it. So you just should look for, I mean, I know I've seen, having been on the other side of having an auditor, you know, being at the nonprofit that's being audited, I know that there's like a sentence. I feel like I've seen it somewhere. There's a sentence, but I didn't think to look at that that's a good thing to point out that you can.
Actually, the 990 itself is a good program for our group potentially.
We should do that. We should
because
have
of all the
how to
kind
look
of
at 990.
disclosures.
Yeah, 990 and what you can find.
By the way, for those who don't, I mean, I think we described it, but it is the quote tax return that nonprofits are required to file. Small ones can do a lot less information. So.
But
that was a good, Lou, thank you. That was a great point to bring up. I mean, and I should have made it because every organization I've been involved in has because they're bigger organizations, have done 990s. And the lawyers, our counsel wouldn't let us get away with less than that, right? I mean, it just wouldn't happen. So, and the auditors wouldn't. So. Good point.
So Ann is asking, hi Ann, about when, we didn't really, because we were sort of running out of time, but when to intervene, when and how to intervene. Did you say everything you wanted to say about that? Because that is the tough.
Yeah, I guess just the 2 points quickly was before you get on the board, ask the right questions, take your time to do your homework. Find the 990, by the way, if they are filed on the not all the organizations, but you can get access to them. Take a look at it, but more importantly, talk to the people there. Talk to some board members, talk to the executive director, and talk to the board leadership. Find out what the understanding of the mission is. And, again, we talk about mission, everybody assumes, oh, we all know what it is, right? But if you ask 10 different people what the mission is, you'll hear different versions of it. So and that was the one thing that before you join, or as soon as you're joined, ask as many questions as you can. Secondly, as you're on the board, if you just have a sense that things are not going well, that the process doesn't seem to be working, that people aren't listening to people, more even so, you're not getting the information we need. That's the most troubling issue I always hear from board members. Are we getting all the information that's available, rather than having to wait 2 months to the next board meeting and get the information there? So if you have that sense, call attention to it, to the board leadership. Do a self-assessment. And I don't want to, it's a heavy term. More formal, you got to do a little more formality, but it's just a simple conversation or a questionnaire, a couple different questions. How are things working? Where could we improve? And take some steps to do that, right?
And are you,
That was my issue, Ann, on intervening. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Jenny.
No, I was actually going to ask you to clarify what you were looking for. So you're probably doing that right now.
So you did cover those points. I think, in my case, I'm on the board and there are a number of issues. And I think one of the big ones is that the chair isn't as engaged as he should be in all these things. And so, this is my roundabout way, of asking if anybody has had that situation other than the founder syndrome. But because I think my experience has been that some people that join boards that for nonprofit, it's kind of like you get what you pay for. And I think they mean well, but maybe they're not well suited. So have you had that experience, and what did you do about it?
I think I hate to admit it, but I think that's a common experience, because people get involved with organizations and boards because of their passion, because they're buying into the purpose. I often find in some of the social service boards that people get involved because they have family members or close friends who are being served by that type of organization or by that organization specifically, but they're not thinking in terms of oversight and management. They're thinking more in terms of how can I support the mission and be good people and all that, but they don't readily, and this is what I was saying before, when you talk about this stuff, it becomes common sense, but it's not necessarily intuitive. You don't normally just come with that, okay, I know what to do now as a board member, right? You have to really think about it and read and understanding what good board practices are. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I faced it many times. I really have. It's not pleasant because oftentimes good people, and you want to talk to them and explain to them. I served as board president many times, explain to them what the role was, what's expected. And you get this glassy-eyed look, I'm not sure what you mean, and you say, well, we have a great executive director. Isn't he or she doing a great job? And we say, well, maybe, but we have a job to do too, right? And it's instilling that kind of mentality and discipline that's tough, but it has to be done and should be done. And the governance committee should play a role in that. And by the way, Bob Jarvis, I saw your question. What are your thoughts about a governance committee that is independent from the board of directors? I have mixed and without getting into specifics, Bob, I have mixed feelings about that. The governance committees that I've been involved in social service, on our school board, are all board members. It's a subcommittee of the board. And we involve sometimes other people's input, but it really is a subcommittee of the board. Usually maybe 3 to 5 at the most, maybe 3 to 5 board members, and the executive director. We always include the top person. In the school board case where I served a long time, we include the superintendent. Right? That person's involved. But if the governance committee is totally independent outside of the board, the danger is they don't have a full grasp on what's going on inside the board. And if that can be managed, then my answer to that is, hey, either way can work. I don't think there's no golden rule, but I do think with the governance committee, there still has to be board representation on it, just to ensure that things are followed up on.
I kind of like, I view it from a, finance and audit being separate. Audit
Yeah,
overlooking. So
Yeah.
in my mind, governance can provide a lot of those same roles of
Yep.
somebody outside. But you're right, unless there's a good communication channel, then governance can be making decisions in a vacuum, and that's never going to work.
Good. Now, at the same time, I could apply the same logic as to board members themselves. If we define the role of the governance committee pretty well and what the expectations are, then maybe it's incumbent upon the governance committee, who's predominantly not board members, to make sure they are in touch with the board leadership, in touch with the board periodically to see what the issues are. That would make some sense, right? So there's no perfect answer that I would give, but I understand what you're saying. Yep.
I appreciate your input on that, Jim. Thanks.
Yep.
I'm wondering, I feel like this maybe could be a session, but what's coming up a lot in these conversations, and it really, Anne's question really made me think about it, is really just simply the topic of communications. How do what are the methods? What are the ways for board members to find out? I actually just finished a project with a nonprofit, and that was a big theme that came up in that nonprofit. And you hear it all the time, like, how do board members find out what they need to find out? How do you do it? How do you communicate? How does the organization, I've seen some really good best practices that I learned about, like the executive director writing every week a kind of a hot topics email to the board, things like that. But how does the board get the information they need so that they feel engaged? Because it's really, really hard. They're volunteers, they got into it, as we've talked about a lot, for different reasons. What are your thoughts, Jim?
Starting with onboarding.
Yeah, starting with onboarding. Exactly. Yes.
And in addition, as part of onboarding or with current board members, I made mention before that the National Association of Corporate Directors, I had a contact in the Philadelphia area. He was a retired partner in Price Waterhouse for 38 years. And then he got involved with the National Association for Corporate Directors. He was the paid executive director there, and then eventually retired. He came in and did an hour-and-a-half presentation at one of our board meetings just on basic governance issues. And it was good. It was really good, particularly coming from an outside person. I mean, I was the board president. I could have done that, but it wouldn't have the same impact or effect. He came from the outside, did that. And there were board members who had been in place for some time, and they came up to me later and said, Jim, we never really realized some of the implications of what we really need to be looking at. So I think, Anne, your point on onboarding is absolutely critical. Good board orientation, good board training. And then again, I would still push back the issue of periodic self-assessments to see how we're doing, right? And it might be need some refresher training, right? It happens. Right? I think training might particularly help some boards who struggle with this whole CEO, executive director evaluation process.
Yeah.
It would be helpful for somebody to come in and talk about what are the common criteria. We establish competencies for our executive director. And that came again from the corporate background experience. We established competencies. We inputted them to our board operating guidelines. And then the job of the board and the CEO was to set up annual goals within each of those competency areas that supported the strategic plan. And that's what we use as a structure for evaluation. But doing all that, there were still board members who struggled with that issue. You know, it's so board onboarding, training, absolutely critical. Yep.
Yeah. And onboarding is often such a missed opportunity. It's not done well enough. And you know that we could actually do a whole session on onboarding too. How do you get people, you know, how do you kind of incorporate people in their new board question? I have a question.
And by the way, I'd also say, go back to good interviewing at the beginning.
Yeah.
Before I get on that diving pool board, to go offshore and ask the kinds of questions that need to be answered. How would I fit in? How does the board operate? You know, how many meetings are there? What do we cover?
Yeah.
Those kinds of questions. But then once the board member is on, there's got to be a structured process in place to onboard.
Yeah. Yeah. Just the whole beginning purpose. This was great. As always,
it went longer than I thought.
you start talking about board service and we can go forever because there's so much, and I think there's so many, it's so complicated. And the other thing, you know, our very first session was a board chair and a executive director, you know, who were a really good team talking about working together. But the other thing I keep thinking about is that, you know, maybe we should get an executive director again, because from, you know, having seen this from the inside, the executive director always, their point of view is this is my job and I'm running everything. And the board is sort of a thing to be contended with. And so there's that push pull, you know, the executive director is there, it's their job, they're being paid, they're usually all in 150%. And I think that's the other half of the equation. We're looking at it from the board's point of view, but from the executive director's point of view, it's, you know, you've always got half of the board who's not really engaged. And, you know, how do you engage them? Or you've got an agenda, you know, you're an expert in the field and you're trying to move. Right. So there's that kind of tension that I think plays into all of this, you know, boards trying to evaluate, boards trying to deal with a founder, you know, it's that perspective is really part of what drives the awkwardness. So anyway, okay, it's 9:57. Anybody have anything else they want to say?
Yeah, listen, I just want to thank everybody who participated. I hope this was helpful. You know, I purposely did not use a cell deck, and I will have some notes available to kind of summarize what was said. And, but again, I hope it was helpful. So.
Yeah, it was great being with you all. And we will, so I don't know what our next one is. We're working on it. We might squeeze another one in this year. We'll see. But we're working on data security. That is a topic that we want to do. And then Lynn and I are actually talking about doing one somewhere on a fundraising topic, because we really haven't done a pure fundraising topic in a while, kind of boards and fundraising. Yeah. So we'll see, but we still have to talk about what that is. All right.